Hi, and welcome to How to Read a Book and More with AI, tools for you and your students. I'm Steve Hargadon, and this is a Library 2.0 program. Sure glad you're here. I'm kind of glad that not all 2,500 people who signed up are here, because that would make it unwieldy, but that's typically the norm. Most people sign up to get the recordings, and we're going to talk about how to deal with all those recordings as part of this session. So most of you are probably familiar with this book if you signed up. If not, Mortimer Adler, who was the editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica, wrote a book called How to Read a Book in 1940. Charles Van Doren, who was also associated with the Encyclopedia Britannica on a project, I think, called The Great Conversations. It was a collection of great books. And they re-released the book in 1972. And many of you have read it or gifted it. It's kind of fun to talk about. Okay, so in the chat, if you've read it, put a note that you have. And let us know what you thought of it and if you've ever given it to someone. Is anybody not seeing the presentation? Not read it, haven't read it, haven't read it, not the way I read books. Hey, we're going to talk about this in a second, but it is kind of fun because I think it's better in theory than it is in practice. And it represented a very different time intellectually, educationally. And I have gifted it to people and known that they haven't read it because it's just complicated. It's more complicated than we're used to. And I actually think even going back when I was in high school and college, when I first became acquainted with it, it was more complicated than I wanted it to be. But we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about this sort of magic moment of the book in this period of time. I read a bit. It's been quite a while, years ago. Oh, you took some great book sessions that featured it. Okay, so let's also have you let us know how you're feeling about large language models, AI and large language models in general. So a large language model would be ChatGPT or Claude or Google Gemini, I guess, and part of Google Gemini, Grok, Perplexity. You love your LLMs. Trust but verify. I agree. Use it daily. Okay, so I'm going to let you know that I'm going through a personal learning renaissance, maybe even a revolution. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but maybe 7 or 8 nights I've stayed up all night in conversation with a large language model. And again, I know all the caveats, and we're going to talk about them in a second, but the capacity for it to be kind of a virtual librarian and allow me to go down very thoughtful paths intellectually has just been unmatched in my life. It's a phenomenal conversational partner. And I feel like there's something really, really important happening with learning right now. We've done a couple of teaching and learning with AI mini conferences that had really high signups, and we've done the libraries and AI mini conferences. And we're getting prepared to do another teaching and learning with AI, but it's just focused on this moment as a learning moment, because there are a lot of struggles with how we teach with AI or we integrate it into the school. But just in terms of a just in terms of a learning tool, it's phenomenal for me. Okay, so and part of the reason this is so interesting is because it addresses the time content dilemma that has throughout my life been substantially increasing, and historically just an increase in content and availability. So I have so many books, and the number that I've actually read all the way through is embarrassingly small. sometimes I've read pieces of the book that really spoke to me. Other times the book kind of exists as a placeholder for ideas that I care about that I'll maybe someday get to. And then I have, not on my bookshelf, but in, next to my couch in the office and next to my bed at home, I have, stacks of books that I haven't read. And I know I'm not alone, right? That this never getting to pile of books is just so substantial. Then I have all these articles I've downloaded. And my YouTube Watch Later folder, I discovered caps at 5,000. So I can't save to my Watch Later folder on YouTube anymore because I have saved 5,000 videos to watch later. It's just sort of a fascinating dilemma, right? And then I've purchased training programs, and I don't get to really sitting through them. I mean, they can be 10 or 15 hours of training. And so they sit in a folder in my Google Drive, and they tease me and make me feel guilty. But there's just so much content. And then I'm creating online event series that many of you have gone to, and that's an additional large amount of content. So this is definitely a dilemma. So before we get to some of these solutions, and they are really fun, they're just phenomenally fun and historically so incredible. I do have some caveats about large language models. And number one is I'm using the word fabrication rather than hallucination, because large language models fabricate responses from the trained mathematical patterns of language over being exposed to just enormous amounts of content. So large language models fabricate. So when people say, well, the large language models typically hallucinate 30% of the time, I feel like that's misleading. Pretty much 100% of their output is fabricated. Now, it can be fabricated in sophisticated ways using kind of reasoning questions to help it get closer to the truth and accuracy, but it doesn't know truth or accuracy. It just knows what exists in most frequent patterns of language. So I don't like the word hallucination because everything a large language model does is a fabrication. They're getting better and better at putting in reasoning questions to get closer to an answer that we would feel is accurate, but everything has to be checked. I also call the confidence with which large language models answer questions the Cliff Clavin problem. If you remember Cliff from Cheers, that they will tell you they're telling you the truth, but they don't actually know what the truth is, the large language model. So I don't know if you remember, but Cliff would say these very sophisticated sounding things that just weren't true. And then if you're interested, I did an interview. Let's see if I can pull it up here. And I'll put the link here in the chat. But this interview, I talk a lot about in depth the what we really know about large language models right now at the time. And if you're paying close attention, you're going to see they've got a little clue here on the right-hand side of that screen where there's an AI summary of my YouTube recording of me being interviewed. So we're definitely going to get back to that. Okay, so the other thing to mention is I've tried to use different tools today for different examples, but the tools are changing fast. Google was way behind, and now Google seems to be actually ahead. People have bad feelings about Grok, but because of Elon Musk, but I love Grok. And it's turned out to be a phenomenal partner in some certain kinds of conversations. There are people who love Claude. Perplexity is my go-to large language model for anything technical, from my car to setting in a software program. But these change fast, and it is hard to kind of keep track of. So the big picture here is the technology, the large language model technology is evolving. It's tremendously useful. I wouldn't worry too much about which tool you're using. Just get used to kind of being in conversation with the large language model. Okay, so this is the basic kind of how to read a book question. right? So can you give me a detailed summary of this book, its main ideas, and enough detail to know if I'm going to find it helpful to me? So in this example that I'm going to show you right now, here we go. This is Perplexity answering that question about how to read a book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. So this is a really good starting question, right? And Perplexity answered it in sort of a very bulleted fashion. You'd probably get and I'll show you a different answer from ChatGPT that was much more conversational. But you can see you could actually, in a couple of minutes, have a pretty good understanding of the book. Now, what I find interesting here is Adler and Doran took this magic moment, the joy of reading, the way in which books change lives, and they put it into such pedantic language that it's not a surprise that most of you answer that you haven't read the book, right? Because it's so dense, and for me it misses the core basic point. But we're going to get to that in a second. So this is Perplexity answering that basic large language model question, right? Which is, can you give me a detailed summary of the book, its main ideas, and enough detail to know if I'm going to find it helpful? This turns out to be really wonderful. Like if I've got 5 books that are sitting there teasing me, and sometimes just knowing the summary is enough to know I don't actually have to read the book. Other times, okay, I want to dive in and I want to dive more deeply. But this is just sort of scratching the surface. The next level with a large language model in a book is that ChatGPT has the most accessible voice conversation technology right now. So you could ask that same question, but you could ask it by voice and have it respond by voice. So I'm hoping you're going to be able to hear this okay. This is me asking how to read a book. This was me asking ChatGPT about the book.
Sure. How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren is a classic guide to reading comprehension, originally published in 1940 with a revised edition in 1972. The book's basic idea is to teach readers how to engage more deeply with books, categorizing reading into levels: elementary, inspectional, analytical, and syntopical. It emphasizes techniques for active reading, note-taking, and critical analysis to get the most out of any book.
And so you can see that's much more conversational. It's not bullet points. I then asked, what's the age level for reading How to Read a Book?
How to Read a Book is generally suited for high school students and adults. The concepts are accessible, but require some maturity in reading and comprehension, making it ideal for those looking to deepen their reading skills, whether they're in late teens or well into adulthood.
Okay, and then I said, for those students who have been brought up in an era of social media, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, does it resonate with them? Do you think that they actually are learning from the book, or how do they actually learn to love reading? And it gives me a reply. It says it may feel kind of old school. I said, even as an adult, I find how to read a book better in theory than in actual reading. I think there's one more piece I wanted to read to you here. Okay, here we go.
I hear you. It can definitely feel like a chore if it gets too bogged down in terminology. The joy of reading should come from discovering new ideas and connecting with the material. Maybe focusing on the parts that inspire curiosity and letting go of any prescriptive methods that don't resonate could keep that excitement alive. After all, the ultimate goal is to enrich your understanding and enjoyment of the topics you're passionate about.
Oh gosh, I'm fascinated by that note in the chat. I can't wait to follow up on that. And Charles Van Doren did end up writing a book called The Joy of Reading, but it's still not like this very sort of simple, basic, hey, the book is like a conversation with the author, which is what I'm going to emphasize here quite a bit. I think I saw in the chat a question about, the copyrights on the books and the book material. How to Read a Book is available through archive.org. And books that are either publicly available or out of copyright, you can upload the full book to almost all of these large language models. I'm going to show you an example of where that's not the case and where it was still very helpful. Okay, so you saw that it moved from information to conversation, and it actually was a very good conversation. Okay, so I think there's something to be said for learning in conversation. Authors organize nonfiction content in their minds in a very structured way, and they want to communicate everything that they have kind of placed into the structure. And so a book typically tends to be highly organized in the way that it's organized in the brain of the author. Now, there are notable exceptions like Malcolm Gladwell, who do a really good job of walking you into the territory and helping you to feel the story. But by and large, you've seen students do this. You get to the first page of a nonfiction book, and by the second paragraph, they're starting to nod off, or they're reading it over and over again. It's not like a conversation. If you had a couple of hours with the author, you would start by asking questions, and you'd say, what is the book about? And well, what about this? And what about that? I think we're built for that kind of questioning. And that's how we start learning. Now, once we've engaged with the material, then we're going to dive in. And, Adler and Van Doren said, look at the title, the table of contents, the index, flip through the book, read parts that are of interest to you. That's really helpful. And I used that method with physical books when I did my futureofeducation.com interview series. And I gave myself 3 hours with each book. And it was not infrequent that my guests would say, you've understood this material better than anyone else who's interviewed me. Now, I think the reason that was true was because I had a system. I knew in 3 hours, I could get enough of an understanding of the book and its material to understand the argument, the flow of the argument, and what was really interesting. Now, it doesn't mean I read everything. There were still things I probably was interested in, but I treated the book like a conversation. So AI is really changing that game by making it easier. So let's look at when we don't have access to the actual book. So one of my favorite books is How to Be a High School Superstar by Cal Newport. And this book is still under copyright. And so if I were to try and find a bootleg version of the book and upload it, that really wouldn't be fair. So what I did was I asked Grok, I said, how much do you know about the book, How to Be a High School Superstar by Cal Newport? You can see that capitalization, oftentimes spelling, punctuation. I didn't even put quotes around the title of the book or put it in italics, which I couldn't do in a prompt anyway, but it's very good at picking up. And Grok came back and said, I'm very familiar with this book and can provide a solid overview based on its core ideas and purposes. So this was a really good answer, right? So this is a great book. He basically went to college students who were thriving and said, what was your high school experience like? And found that rather than doing activities to be able to put them on their college admissions applications, they actually took fewer AP courses and did more things that were of genuine interest to them, which the admissions applications are attempting to find out, but become kind of a benchmark for kids trying to meet those expectations without actually the authentic drive and learning behind them. So Grok did a really good job kind of describing in his language and the like. So then I asked Grok, would it be a fair characterization to say that this is about becoming an authentic learner rather than performative based on others' expectations? And these large language models, you probably noticed, are very complimentary of you. That's brilliant. You're so smart, right? I said, yes, that's a spot on way to frame it. At its core, How to Be a High School Superstar is absolutely about becoming an authentic learner, someone driven by genuine curiosity and self-directed interests. So then I talked about kind of, I feel like the structure of high school and the expectations for college admissions almost seem to lead away from authentic learning and to the more performative, and because that's kind of, it's the gateway to the working world, which is not always based on your authentic interests in learning, but more on your being able to do the tasks that need to be done. And Grok says, yes, you're absolutely onto something here. And we had a really good conversation. And then I asked, does he expand on these ideas in any of his other books in a way that's helpful to understand now? he writes for the New Yorker now, and he wrote a book on slow productivity, which I really love. But Grok gets this wrong. So it says Cal Newport doesn't directly revisit How to Be a High School Superstar. There's a sequel in his later books. And, he talks about deep work, which is another book of his, and digital minimalism. And I said, did he write other books on school or education? He hasn't written additional books specifically. And then I said, it seems that you missed How to Be a Straight A Student by him, which was another book that he wrote for college students. And Grok says, you're right. So again, this is this reminder that what Grok says and ChatGPT and others, what it says authoritatively isn't necessarily authoritative, right? It's just fabricated language results, which tend to be brilliantly illuminating and helpful, but not always entirely accurate. Okay, so now let's talk about YouTube, because this isn't just about books. We're talking about content. And if you notice on that page of the interview with me, there was the summary on the right-hand side. So I use 3 different tools for YouTube summaries. I use Edify, which doesn't require that you pay to get a certain amount of responses. Mind Studio, which also right now is free, and which is a phenomenal technology. It's a browser extension. You're going to see me demonstrate it. It does like 30 different things. And then a program called TubeOn AI, which really started me on the YouTube summaries that I really liked. So if we're going to go there, you're going to see that the Edify, I'm going to give you an example of Edify. It will give a summary, a timestamp summary, a transcript, the top comment, and then any of those can be exported so that you have access to them in some form if you wanted to be keeping track of them. So I'm going to go back to my screen here, and this is Cal Newport. I interviewed him in 2011 about his book, How to Be a High School Superstar. And you can see on the right there that this is the key insights summary. And then this next one here is the timestamp summary. And then this is the top comment. Not many comments. And this is the transcript. And to the right here, you can actually click on this, and it lets you download in a variety of formats: link, text, a TXT document, a doc, Word document, or a PDF, or Markdown format. So now I get through that list of 5,000 videos that I'll never get through in my watch later in YouTube. All of a sudden doesn't seem that daunting. If I see a YouTube video and it's an hour or 2 hours, I'll do the summary to kind of have an understanding of, do I want to put this in a queue where I'll listen to it in the car or something later? So this has turned out to be just terrific for me, at least specifically with YouTube. Next is transcriptions. So part of the AI technology that's really helped move this along is the ability to take video or audio and transcribe it into text, because then you can put the text into the large language model. You're going to see when I get to NotebookLM, you can now actually put MP3 audio files directly into NotebookLM, and you don't even have to go through the transcription phase. But in a lot of cases, you've got some content that you want to have summarized or to be able to drill down on or make connections with, and so you need to get a transcription. So non-YouTube videos are often that way. If there's a legitimate way to download them or to get the transcription file, video and audio files that you might have or that are accessible to you. And I use a program called TurboScribe. It's about $20 a month. I think it's $10 a month if you buy it yearly. But it does a great job of taking really long audio and turning it into a very accurate transcription that I can then send through one of the large language models to determine, okay, what's actually being said here and how closely do I want to listen? And another thing that people don't often associate with AI, but clearly is a part of what's going on here, is that listening to content now is much more than just listening to an audiobook, right? So you can take a PDF file or a text file, or you can even copy if you're not using ChatGPT in its voice form, I think it's Perplexity that also has a nice voice form, but we're going to get to a stage where you're going to get to put all your ideas in the tools you're using. But if you are using a large language model and it doesn't do audio for you, you can copy all of the text and then bring it over into one of the reader programs. 11 Labs has a free reader called 11 Reader. You just click import from paste the text in if you've copied it from a large language model, and it puts it into a document to read it to you at your convenience. There's an older program called Add Voice that I use quite a bit. It just lets you click the share button and it puts it into Add Voice on my Android phone. Wait for it, because we're going to look at NotebookLM, and it's just phenomenal. And there are other paid apps and programs that do this. But listening is actually a part of this experience for me as well, turning something that was previously not listenable into something listenable. And it's going to sound weird, but taking a longer text or a book, turning it into a summary or a detailed summary, and then listening to that summary is actually an enormous time saver for me, even with those steps. And I feel like I'm much more likely to participate in learning about the content and then deciding, do I want to go further? Same with articles. So one of my big disappointments for a long time has been, it's been almost impossible to go to a web page and get a good summary of the web page. Gemini could do this if you got your API key and you figured things out, but there wasn't just sort of a natural, easy way, like with Adify, to just look at a YouTube video and then, look at a web page and actually just have it tell you a summary of the page, until this tool just came out, or at least I just found out about it. It's called Mind Studio. This is it's a Chrome extension here, and it gives you, with one click, a summary of the article, which is really nice, because sometimes I'll hit an article, a fairly long article somewhere, and I'm like, okay, I just want to know. Sometimes the author does a really good job of having some bullet points at the beginning to kind of tell you what's going on. But if they don't, sometimes you feel like you're going to be reading for 5 minutes before you really understand the argument. And so I use Mind Studio now quite a bit. I'm going to click back here, and you're going to see all of the other tools that are available. So it sits here kind of hidden. Let's see if I can close this. Sits here hidden on the web page. I click this open. This is free. I haven't paid anything for it. And it has all of these different agents, some of which I think are paid and you would have to upgrade to use them. But it has a fact-checking agent, a deep research, a generate a podcast. I haven't tried that yet, and I want to. This is the one I use: too long, do not read, or do read. Instant article and document summarizer, executive summary, YouTube summarizer, enriching content, tells you other facts about the topic that you might be interested in knowing, removing bias. Tried that, wasn't quite sure how I felt about it, but again, they're only going to get better. Simplify, and a number of other tools here for student tools, create a study guide. This is really a great tool. I'm just kind of stunned that it exists now. Okay, so then Mind Studio is definitely my current go-to. Okay, conferences. So this is super interesting. Many of you attend the Library 2.0 and Learning Revolution mini conferences, which often have 15 to 20 sessions. And, they're many of them held concurrently. So if you want to go back and actually watch the content, you may be talking about 10 to 15 hours worth of content on a topic. What I did for the last Libraries and AI on Libraries conference was I actually took all the transcripts, which Zoom gave me automatically from the recordings. I put them into ChatGPT, and I did a full summary asked it to give me a full summary of the conference, which is this link here. Anybody can go to this page. I'll put the link up top into the chat. And I thought, well, this is a really nice thing, as the conference organizers, to give you an easy way to kind of tell what was in the conference. ChatGPT also gave me kind of a press release article version. I went to NotebookLM and I did that audio overview, the deep dive podcast, and that's here. It's 31 minutes long. There's we'll get into the NotebookLM stuff as well here, but taking the content from the conference, you wouldn't have to be me, the organizer, to do this, because all of the sessions here are on YouTube. So you could go to YouTube, you could use the Edify app, and you could look at the summaries of each one and decide which sessions you want to listen to. I don't know about you, but that moves the conference from someday I'll want to listen to these to, I'll actually kind of go through this in half an hour and see what people said and then decide if there's something I really want to listen to. Okay. So let's talk about NotebookLM, right? So NotebookLM is just getting better and better. This is a Google product. It lets you put multiple sources into a notebook, and then it does a variety of things related to it. And it's just kind of phenomenal. I'm going to go in and show it to you, but it will give you an overview of each document or full file you've put in, including audio files. It will create an audio overview. That's that podcast, deep dive podcast. It'll create a mind map of the main ideas that you can drill down on, and then it will give you summaries of each idea, which is, if you've got multiple books that you're looking at all on the same topic, it's phenomenal. It'll do an FAQ, a study guide, and the briefing document is the one I use most of all. And as of yesterday or today, it has this new Discover Sources button, which I haven't tried yet, but it's a way of helping find source documents you can put in your notebook. So let's go into NotebookLM and look at that. Oh, sorry, I meant to show you this. This is so going to the YouTube channel for Library 2.0 for the conference we just held. Obviously, this is using Edify to do this, so that same summary kind of individually on the individual talks that I did as a whole for the conference. Okay, so this is a NotebookLM on how to read a book. So again, because how to read a book in PDF form is available at archive.org, I felt very comfortable pulling it in here. If this is my source panel, and if I go over and click on that, it will actually give me a summary of this document. If you have multiple documents, it'll give you a summary of each. But this is a summary of the document that I've put in as one of the sources, and gives the key topics, and you can click and it will tell you more about it, discuss active reading skills. It was just crazy, crazy good. Okay, so that's where you put your sources, and you can add, I can't remember how many sources documents you can put in, but it's quite a few. If somebody knows, they could put it in the chat. I don't know how I'm gonna get back to the regular chat here. I don't know that that's actually important, but maybe I'll hit refresh. Yeah. And it doesn't automatically save your history. You have to save things as notes or source documents yourself if you get an answer that you're interested in, which is kind of nice, because at first it really bothered me that it wasn't automatically storing everything. But as you will see, it's just an enormous amount of information. Okay, so down here at the bottom, you can add a note. You can do the audio interview podcast, or you can create a mind map. I've done these already to populate this. They're also here in the studio, which will generate the deep dive conversation. And I'm not going to do that because it takes 10 minutes or so, and then you have a 15 to 30 minute podcast on the topic, which is sort of earth-shatteringly realistic. But you have the core concepts of the book. Let's see, this is the timeline. Timeline is for something, if you're looking at historical things. I did it here, but it didn't really apply to this book. This is the briefing document. This is, which one is this? Art of reading well, engaging with text. Can't remember if that's the FAQ. This is probably the FAQ. This is the study guide. And then this is the mind map. So I want to show you the briefing document quickly. So this is basically an overview of the book. And this is what I would copy and put into an audio reader if I really wanted kind of a deep dive into what the book's contents are. I like this in audio form better than I like the podcast, because the podcast is not necessarily as organized or as deep. And then if I go back here, you can see the mind map. So this is a mind map of the book, right? And then on any particular topic, let's say goals of reading for information, reading for understanding. And if I click on reading for information, it will actually give me a kind of a deep summary of the reading for information aspect of the book, with footnotes into the material. So, and then if I wanted to, I can actually save this content. Once you start playing with NotebookLM, you're going to, this would be the place where if you bought a training program, and I'm going to show you here. My son-in-law is a therapist who uses neuro-linguistic programming. I wanted to learn more about it. So I bought an inexpensive program on what is neuro-linguistic programming. It was all MP3s that got downloaded. I downloaded them into this notebook. I can click on any particular one, and it will give me in this case, it gives the transcript, but also gives a summary overview of the introduction here. If I wanted to go to something called anchoring in NLP, here's a description of it and links that I can find out more. And then I pre-generated here, the briefing document and sessions 1 to 10, and it gives all of those topics. And this is what I would copy and put into an audio form to listen to when I'm on a walk or in my car. And then here's the mind map, just because these are kind of so amazing, right? So anchoring, click on that. And then I don't know that much about NLP, but some of this I recognize. But then you can go to any particular confidence for public speaking. That would have been good for me today, right? And then it will give you kind of a deep dive on that within the context of the material. Okay. So if you're not blown away, then you have been more astute than I in keeping up with this. But I've been using NotebookLM for a couple months now, and I'm just blown away. Okay, so for me, the big takeaway here is that this is, as much as it's a personal learning revolution for me, and as much as it's the extension of the core idea that I took from Adler and Van Doren's book, which is the book is a conversation with the author. The big takeaway for me here is this turns me from a passive recipient to an active learner, where I'm drilling down, I'm asking the questions. In Adler and Van Doren's system, you engage with the content by writing notes in the margins of the book, which I've done for years. And you're engaged in your own head with the content and your questions and ideas. But that's very different than being actually engaged with the content in the way that a large language model can do for you. So what the large language model does is it actually turns me into a seeker in the content rather than a passive recipient. Oh, I'm going to have to listen to 5 hours of something, or I'm going to sit down and read a book that's going to take 10 hours to read. I can actually engage quickly into the conversation with the material and then make my choices as to where I'm going to go. In terms of education, this is what I've been calling agentic education, this idea that the learner as an agent, it's this sort of brilliant parallel of language with a agentic AI and the agentic learner, the self-directed learner. And again, it matches with Cal Newport's idea of following your actual interests, not to try and match what you think the admissions officers want in high school, but actually being interested, because that's what they're trying to find out. So for me, that's the big takeaway from passive to active learner. So we're going to shift now, and for the balance of our time, which is about 22 minutes, I'm really interested in your thoughts. I'm now going to actually look at the chat. If anybody took notes and wants to put anything in the chat that would have gone by that I've missed, please feel free to do so. But are there tools that you're using that I didn't mention? Are there ideas that I didn't bring up that you wanted to bring up? Are there, and I will capture the chat log. I'm going to want to read it, but I'll also post it with the recording so that if you want to look at the recording, the chat log from the recording, and people put tools in or ideas, you're welcome to do so. Okay, so it says we have some Q&As. Do you have advice for the AI tools available through mobile devices? I just got a new Samsung. Okay, I have a Samsung, and I thought I was going to get all this great AI capacity, and it's there, but I'm not using it because this large language model stuff is so compelling to me. So I'm using the app versions of Grok and ChatGPT and Perplexity in particular. And you heard me play that ChatGPT back. That's from my phone. So I'm not sure. I mean, I know that there are people who are going to argue that the Google phone, the Pixel, is better than the Samsung. For my purposes, it's the large language model apps that are really doing it for me, not the inherent capabilities in the phone. Although clearly Google is doing magic, and whatever they're doing with Gemini is going to get integrated everywhere. Some of it scares me. I don't really want Google Gemini going through my whole Google Drive folder and all my emails. It just feels like too much of an invasion of my privacy. But I could see where it could be really helpful in terms of answering stuff. Okay, thanks for bringing up the issue of how do large language models get their data. Okay. For instance, large language models have been programmed to reflect the intelligence present in human development from one cell conception to 40 million structured cells of birth. How does that data get into LLMs? I don't know if I'm going to answer your question necessarily the way you were asking it, but I think it's important to recognize that we are built for narrative and not for truth. And we struggle. That's the reason that we have, a balance of power in government. We have trial by jury and innocent until proven guilty. Our brains seem to have been built much more for narrative and social purposes than for logic and reason. Of course, we have the capacity for logic and reason, but large language models have been trained on a bulk of material that's not necessarily true. So, like the narratives around the JFK assassination is a current historical example, or the narratives around world wars or other things reflect the cultural consensus, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're true. And AI will answer based on what's known as the Overton window, which is the current cultural consensus. So sometimes for a tricky topic, you have to actually kind of drill past that and say, hey, I'm interested in how people talk about this outside of the general consensus. And that's everything from social to scientific topics. If I missed the question there, feel free to ask again. Talk more about TurboScribe. I don't know. Just a customer of theirs. I think it may only be English, but I can't say for sure. I think it's turboscribe.com. Middle and high school librarian, where do you recommend these AI tools fit at all in research and information literacy instruction? Okay, so people have a lot of different opinions about the use of AI in school. For me, I talk about the calculator effect, which is the use of a calculator has led to a couple of generations of adults who can't do basic math in their head. Now, you may say that's okay because they're always going to have a calculator. Just as there's that parallel between agentic AI and agentic learning, I think there's a parallel between the word generative AI and generative teaching. So although we do a lot in education that is sort of compliance and testing oriented, when we really think about how you would help be generative as a teacher or a mentor, which is the Erik Erikson model of kind of helping the next generation without necessarily getting anything back in return, then you would teach them how to use the tools, and you'd also teach them the difficulties that can be associated with depending on the tool. So this is a hard thing because we do it in a lot of areas, right? We eat a lot of food that's not good for us because the manufacturers make a lot of money producing food that will trigger our evolutionary instincts to eat. So when we talk about food, we talk about, hey, you try and eat healthy, try and eat in moderation. The same thing's going to be true for using AI. Using it where it can be helpful, but understanding that the things that the skills that we want to learn, we don't want to lose the ability to reason and to write. And multiple studies have been showing that those who are depending on AI, both in school and in business, are definitely seeing a reduction in their writing and reasoning skills. So I think you just have to be really careful and you have to be very open about it. Any idea how I can use these tools with students and reading textbooks? Well, if the textbook is available legally in a form where you can put it into NotebookLM, you're going to find it's a very different experience to use the textbook in NotebookLM. My guess also is that publishers of these textbooks are going to create platforms for, if they haven't already, and I'm just not in that arena, where you can interact with the textbook in that same kind of a fashion. Okay. Oops. What about copyright? When you add articles programs, etc. in NotebookLM, this is just not a violation. What happens to all this info you've uploaded? Yeah, so that's why I'm saying you use sources that you have available to you, either in the copyright is expired or it's publicly available at a site like archive.org. I think you just have to be really careful because if you've paid for an article and you upload it to NotebookLM and you're using that to study or to do something else, I personally don't think that that would be seen as a violation of copyright, because large language models don't actually, they're not memorizing the content. They're just looking at the patterns of the words and the frequency of those patterns. But it's definitely something that a lot of people are talking about, and we did talk quite a bit about it in our Ethics and AI event. And there are going to be legal cases that are going to kind of give us more guidance on what's okay and what's not. I personally don't have a problem if I've bought something that's copyrighted, putting it into NotebookLM to get summary, but then I would feel very uncomfortable producing content from that. Good answer. Is there an AI option that seeks truth with priority over narrative? Okay, so Grok tends to be advertised as having fewer restrictions. So there's the large language model at the beginning, right, which is getting access to all of this content and basically to the view of the culture on topics. After that initial training, there is human training, where the large language models are trained to give appropriate answers. And a lot of what we would call politically correct or Overton window responses come from that training. So Grok says that it doesn't do that as much, and it even has different personalities that you can click to get different kinds of, irreverent or snarky, or I can't remember what they are, but they're different ones. I've never used them. I do find that I get very good at asking questions like, what do people who disagree with that conclusion believe, and why do they believe it? And then it does a good job to, that's a good way of kind of getting around those initial constraints. Okay, I think this next question is kind of the same thing. Logic, evidence-based truth. So just remember, large language models don't actually reason. They're mimicking reasoning by having the large language model have a set of questions that it creates for itself, or another associated large language model creates, in order to drill down in the material. Just like if you did a better job with a prompt where you were very specific about concerns. But the large language model isn't thinking. It doesn't have consciousness, so far as we know. So no matter what, it's not actually reasoning or truth. You just have to check and see. And quite honestly, I could walk down the street and bring up any of a number of very kind of current topics, and people would have very different beliefs about what's true and what's not true. And so if large language models are based on human contributions, they're going to have human answers. Okay, other technology we've seen rise very quickly and become incredibly popular have eventually degraded in quality and usefulness. Facebook and Google search are common examples. Okay, I'm going to answer this, Kimberly, pretty deeply, but allow me 60 seconds of a personal rant. Most of these companies are commercial. There are open source models, but they're going to have to look for revenue. Facebook and the social media companies do a very good job of using your interactions with those online tools to determine your psychographic profile. It's like a demographic profile, but it's your psychology. And then they feed you things that will keep you engaged or encourage you to buy. Large language models are going to be way better at this. They're going to be able, because they're so based in your contributions and your language and your interests, and they're going to be much better at actually speaking back to you in the language that appeals to you, that I think we have to be very careful about this. I'm not sure they're going to degrade in quality as much as we're going to realize they're going to be very good at keeping us engaged and telling us what we want to hear. So, again, as a personal practice, I try not to eat food from the center of the grocery store, right? Because it's, processed sugar, salts, fat, whatever it is. In the same way, I think when you interact with AI, you're going to have to say, hey, I have to be really careful here to push back and say, are there different opinions about something and the like. Once you add compelling visual connections, so I'm talking to ChatGPT. I played that recording back to you. Very soon, there's going to be an avatar. Some of these programs already have them. That's going to talk back. That's going to look and act like a person. And if you've seen the movie Her, that I think is going to become a reality. And we're going to have to be very careful to be talking about this and then teaching the difference between sort of the psychological manipulation that can occur and learning to think for ourselves. If you're really interested in this topic, you go back 150 years to the sort of the advent of psychology, and then Edward Bernays and the broad use of propaganda and persuasion in business and government. And this is a little bit of a rabbit hole. This is one that's kept me up a couple of nights trying to figure out how we address the power that's going to be available here to communicate in ways that are persuasive to us. It's probably more than you expected, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, you made a pretty good case for these tools, but I'm struggling to see where the revolution lies. These concepts already exist. Okay, I've always been an active reader, and I have a couple thousand books, and this has dramatically changed my intellectual landscape. And so maybe you kind of have to get into it and you'll realize just how profoundly engaging this is. But for me, it really is a revolution, and especially because it's like having a great librarian who's read every book in the world at ready access to tell you what the connections are with other material and how they connect. Like that connection between how to read a book and how to be a high school superstar. I could spend several hours on that because I think it's all about authentic learning. And that would be hard to do just with me and 2 books and a pencil and paper. I want to get it right. If I download an article in which my library subscribes to and upload it to Notebook, to outline essential points for me, will that attract any penalty? I'm not a lawyer. Maybe somebody has a good answer in the chat. I don't believe that it would be seen as unethical behavior. Obviously, the distribution of that copyrighted material to anybody else would be that way. But the large language model isn't memorizing that content. It's looking for language patterns. I'm personally comfortable with it, but if somebody has a better answer than that, please feel free. Okay, I made up that term psychographic profile. I mean, I didn't make it up, but I'm the only one I know who's using it currently because I have been very concerned about that with regard to social media, and I think it's a very present danger of large language models. Okay, so I went through the Q&A, which means I didn't see any of the chat, and I'm sure there are a ton. If anybody has something that was really critical that didn't get placed in there, go ahead and click on the Q&A button, and that's probably a better way to surface it for me if you feel like there's a question that came up that you'd really like me to try and answer. And I'll stick around a little bit past the hour. So if there's something that's really compelling to you, I want to make sure I can address it. Oh, I should stop sharing it. You've been seeing my screen of me. Okay, Q&A. What if the average student just wants AI as automated cliff notes and not as engagement? Well, I think that's where the generative teaching kind of comes in. It's harder for sure. And students are going to do that in the same way that they've used cliff notes. That's not to the student's long-term advantage, but adults do it too. And so the ability to communicate to the student that shortcut may or may not be one that has an outcome that they want is kind of at the heart of engaging with students as a learning mentor. But it's not easy. Tips on a good prompt. I'm not really big on learning prompting. I talk to the large language model the way I would talk to somebody whose answer I really cared about. and they're very good at parsing out now. Maybe at the beginning, a couple of years ago, it was a little bit more difficult, but now I just talk to the large language model the way I would talk to a very intelligent person, and then ask for clarifications or to modify kind of the direction of the conversation. But yeah, and I actually will often just record my thoughts. I did a session for an online event on creating an online boot camp, and I just recorded into a note-taking app, about 10 minutes worth of thoughts about the concepts and the ideas for the topic that I was building the boot camp on, which was AI for homeschooling. And it did a brilliant job of kind of capturing all the elements, because I was concerned about parents and household rules on AI and the very things we're talking about here. What are the best sources for free AI? Certainly the large language models coming out of China purport to be open source and purport to be free. And again, all kinds of questions we don't know how to answer. Facebook's Llama is open source, or claims to be open source and free. A lot of people I know don't pay for anything and then just use the tools to some regulated limit. I'm probably not the best person to answer that, because I have readily paid for some of these services because they're just so helpful to me. Psychographic profile of yoga clothing company might include individuals who value fitness, health, and balanced lifestyle, who are active and enjoy a luxury car. Yeah, and I'm maybe less concerned about those kind of buying profiles and more. Edward Bernays was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he took the ideas of the subconscious and turned them into persuasive marketing and governance. The kinds of manipulation I'm concerned about are the ways in which we are prone to psychological triggers or shortcuts that end up being kind of the subject of those experiments, like the Milgram experiment, where people were willing to shock someone at a level that would have induced death if it were actual, where people were willing to comply in certain circumstances, or they will not tell the truth if the group is not telling the truth. So I think there are some deeper issues there than just the kind of the marketing. Advice for authors writing a book that will be a dialogue between the reader and the author. Sorry, but maybe email me if you want more on that, but I don't have a ready answer for that. Ask the AI product how to write their prompts. Yeah, that's great, Sandra. Great answer. Just ask the AI how to write the prompt. Do you have any suggestions for reading for further information in today's discussion? Well, feel free to follow me at stevehargadon.com, and I'm going to try and keep talking about this. And then Library 2.0, library20.com, we're trying to do more and more sessions on AI. Can you explain more fully why and how you are more engaged when reading a summary of a longer form argument than they are when you read the entire argument? No, you have misconstrued the point. If I have to spend an hour reading something to fully understand the argument, but if I were in a conversation with someone, I could know it in 10 minutes. That's what the AI summary is doing for me. It's giving me an opportunity to see the quick overview, to kind of get the lay of the land. Now, that's obviously not the detail, but it's the lay of the land. Then, if I were in a conversation with the author in a physical situation present with them, I could then drill down on the pieces of this that actually engage within my own framework of ideas and ask questions that lead me into the material. And that's where, beyond the summary, going into the engagement is, for me, phenomenal. Like, I can have a conversation with ChatGPT on a very deep topic, and I know it's a large language model, and I know it's just producing fabricated responses. But I was up all night, and I'm not kidding, talking about the allegory of Plato's cave and how that relates to our current circumstances, and how human nature seems to have been the same. Right? That we have projected narratives that we follow. There are people who are those who benevolently or malevolently craft those stories, that we follow them along, and then the difficulty of actually seeing beyond that and understanding that those narratives are just narratives, and how when that freed intellect comes back into the cave, they are not believed and And some translations are physically kind of beaten up for coming back and telling the truth. So that for me was an opportunity to talk about an idea that was more than just writing a note in the margin and thinking through it in my mind. My email address. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I should have not. I should have gone back to that slide at the beginning. I apologize. Let's go entire screen. Okay. Hopefully that's better for you. And I got to take this off there. Okay, so let's see what you're seeing. That's not it. There. Hopefully you're seeing the right screen now. Okay. And AI in disciplinary databases is allowing people to develop their topic and provide the top 10 articles, but isn't this essential research skills that students develop, not rely on it? Okay, so there's a trade-off there, right? Which is, like with all technologies, the shortcut takes me further, but it also has costs potentially to my capacity. So the calculator allows me to do math I couldn't do otherwise, but if I can't do basic math, there's something missing in my life that I feel is important. So, I can't, when I get in my car, I don't know how to actually build a car, but the car takes me places that, much further than if I were walking. So these are sort of essential core trade-offs that we have in our lives with technologies. I like the Amish approach to technology, which is test the technology against your core fundamental beliefs and then decide where to use it and where not to. We're not usually that logical, but it's a really good way of looking at some of this and saying, okay, if I have access to a tool that will do a fair amount of what otherwise would be me walking through the stacks and looking for things, that's great. But what am I missing because of that? And what might I need to do to make sure that I'm not just depending on the AI when there may be content or material that otherwise I should be finding? Okay. Yeah, I can't wait to read the chat. I'm so sorry that I haven't been able to go through the chat, but thank you for putting those questions in the Q&A. Yeah, a conversation with other people who've read the same book. I'm just picking out one here. Yeah, of course, that's great, for sure. But I will tell you that as rewarding as that is, and as much as I look for that, the virtual librarian will actually know more, which doesn't make the conversation with the person any less valuable, but it's also another great way to hold a conversation. Okay, I think we're maybe done. We'll keep doing more. The recording will be up tomorrow along with the chat log. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you found something valuable today, and we'll look forward to more. See you online again.